Hello and welcome to the ROKER Report podcast. I'm your host, Connor Bromley, and joining me today for this therapy session, is what I'm going to call it, is Bomber. How are you doing today, Bomber?
I'm alright, Connor. Apart from the football side of things, everything else is all alright, but yeah, not too bad.
We've also got Chris Wynn. How are you doing today, Chris?
Yeah, I'm not too bad. I tried to forget about the football, but you dragged me back in.
Yeah, pull you out and then they bring you back in. It's the way it goes, Chris.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about it. I think it's best in these situations to just let it all out, talk it through, and then by the end of this, you'll be looking forward to a meaningless game against Fleetwood. I put on my social media, you made a video about it, to say that I thought that result was one of the worst result at the Stadium of Light, for sure, but one of the worst results in Sunderland's history. I got plenty of stick. I got plenty of agreement as well on social media. So, Chris, is it one of the worst, and is it the worst home defeat at the Stadium of Light?
It's got to be up there, but I wasn't kind of devastated as if we were a Premier League club and got held to a League 2 or Division 4 as it used to be, or Division 3, whatever it was. I wasn't kind of devastated thinking, oh, it's been a huge cup upset and we're on the end of it and, you know, we're this, we're that. It was just flat. It was kind of, you know, we got knocked out of the FA Cup and afterwards it was, you know, meh. It was one of those because at the end of the day, it's a lower league club getting beat by another lower league club or a worse lower league club. And I don't think it's the worst result in the world because, purely because of that fact. But if you look at the state of the club and the position of the club, it's a fairly good indicator of where we are. It might not have been the worst result for me in our history or during our time at the Stadium of Light, but it's without doubt, and I don't think anybody can disagree, it's the worst position the club's ever been in our history. Whether you just look at purely, you know, the league we're in, the league position, how long we've been there, the state of the boardroom, just everything. It's the worst state we've been in our history. And yeah, so the result's just a sign of that, I think, and just a result that's been building up, I think, all season.
Bomber, what do you make of that? I mean, I saw you nodding a bit there in agreement with Chris.
Yeah, so I kind of agree with Chris on that point. I completely get what you're saying. I would agree with Chris. I don't necessarily think it's the worst result in our history or up there. The one thing that I would say is that, just to echo the point Chris was making, all it does is that result provides us the sober realisation that of the position we're in, and that's what makes it the most depressing. And that in that definition, you could say it is the worst result in the club's history because we're at our lowest point, having our lowest result or our worst result at our lowest point. So in that respect, yeah, it is. I mean, there's been bigger upsets and there's been worse defeats, but yeah, it's that sober realisation that this is where we're at. You know, we're a League 1 club losing to a League 2 club that hasn't won all season. I say what tends to happen with the bigger upsets, people talk about when we're in the Premier League and losing to League 1 sides. What tends to happen is, you know, Premier League sides in the early rounds of the FA Cup put out a second or a third string 11. We didn't do that and we got beat. So, you know, it depends what your metrics are for what makes a terrible result. But it's certainly up there in terms of it being amongst the worst.
Yeah, I think that some people were arguing that the worst results were, say, losing 5-1 against Newcastle, because they're the ones that make you feel the worst. But to me, seeing Sunderland, who are now above average League 1 team, I'll be fair to them, they're an above average League 1 team, losing to a League 2 side that haven't won a game this season, that's third bottom, 90th in the Football League. That to me is what made it the worst result, you know, in our history, because and it's what you said, Chris. It essentially shows what we are right now, which is we are a bog standard lower league football club that lost against a substandard lower league football club, and to me that just made it almost impossible to swallow. Now I found it interesting to see so many people coming out with, well, it's just the FA Cup, it doesn't matter, we need to focus on league games, because there's just an acceptance that Sunderland now lose against Mansfield Town at home at the Stadium of Light. I just find it bizarre.
Connor, just to throw it back to you, I mean, were you absolutely devastated?
I wasn't devastated, I was apathetic to it, and that's almost worse.
Well, yeah, but what you've just said there, you've said, there was those comments on social media saying it was just the FA Cup, and you're now saying, well, I was apathetic towards it as well. So it sounds like you had a slight sense of that without maybe kind of thinking it.
That's why I think it is, you know, it is. When I say the worst, I think it's in my lifetime, this is one of the worst. And I think in our history, it's difficult to argue that this wouldn't be in the top 10 of worst results, in my opinion anyway. I just think that I'm apathetic to it, which makes it worse because I'm sitting there watching Sunderland lose against Mansfield and accepting that that's normal. We didn't outclass them, and Mansfield score one goal out of nowhere. We literally looked the same as Mansfield, who are the third worst team in the Football League. It's normalising how terrible Sunderland is as a football club. It's the epitome of everything that's went wrong over the last 5 years, culminated in a game at the Stadium of Light where we lost 1-0 to 90th in the Football League, a team that haven't won a game this season, a team that's just changed their manager, a team that Sunderland should not be competing with, and it looked like two teams. You wouldn't know which side was the League Two side. That, to me, is why I was of the opinion that this was one of the worst results in our history.
Of course, it's a bad result. It's one of the worst at the Stadium of Light, like you said, but you sound like you're agreeing with me and Bomber there, where you're saying it's the lowest position the club have been in. It's our lowest ebb. Not necessarily, that result is a
Yeah, I
an
know
indicator of where we are, and you're agreeing with us that you're saying, look, it's an indicator of where we are. I'm apathetic towards it. It's because of the position of the club. You're not really saying that one-off game is the worst result in the club's history. You're actually agreeing with me and Bomber by the sounds of it.
No, because I still think that sorry, Bomber, I'll let you jump in a second, but I still think that this was, it is the epitome of the disaster of the club the last few years, which it still was the worst result. I mean, we've never lost against a team that low in the Football League pyramid at the Stadium I liked. I think I've certainly tried to look up the stats and I can't see any teams that have been lower. That to me is what made it worse. But anyway, Bomber, jump in.
Yeah, so all I was going to say is I do understand what you're saying. I think the definition that you're using is different to what Chris and I and probably a few on Twitter might be using. I would argue that, all right, it's not at the Stadium of Light, but shipping 8 against Southampton was probably a worse result. But what you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that you're saying effectively the club is in its worst ever position, and having been in this position for the last 3 seasons, this is our worst result of that period. So by that definition, it's our worst result that we've had.
Yeah, I would say that that's where I am at with this.
I think I agree with you. That's it's not. I don't see it as an individual result, saying no, it's the worst result. But I think the circumstances, if you take everything that's going on at the club, the position we find ourselves in, the league we find ourselves in, the style of play and the football and the performances that we're putting in, then to come up with that result, then by that definition, I would agree with you. It's there, but it's not just that result in isolation. It's all the circumstances put into that melting pot, and it's come up with this big golden dump, which is a 1-0 defeat to Mansfield.
So on that basis, Connor, I'll put it back to you. Was that the worst result in Sunderland's history?
I would say it is comfortably in the top sort of 3 or 4. Yeah. Comfortably in there. I don't think you can definitively say a result is the worst, because I haven't went through the history books and looked. I know people have brought up the fact we lost to Yeovil in 1949 and stuff. In my lifetime, this is the worst result that I've seen. Prior to that, I don't know, because I can't reference particular results before I was born, because obviously I wasn't there to see them. But I don't think that this result could be not in the top 5. It's certainly the worst Stadium of Light defeat. It fits in them categories.
Yeah.
What was it? What do you think is the difference then, Connor? I'm not necessarily disagreeing with you or agreeing with you. So when we were in the Premier League and lost to Bradford, what about that defeat makes it less worse, if that's a phrase, than this one?
Because that defeat was a quote unquote cup shock. That defeat was a team jumping up levels and, having the crowd behind it and all that sort of stuff. And Bradford went and they beat Sunderland that day, and Sunderland did play terrible, and it was a terrible result. This was watching Sunderland be comfortably matched by Mansfield at home, and watching Sunderland, not look like a superior team to Mansfield. Sunderland losing against Bradford, he also made changes that day as well. It wasn't necessarily the strongest team, but that was, I would say, it didn't feel...
It was a triumph for Bradford rather than...
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's why I thought it was... And also, when you're in the Premier League and you lose sort of FA Cup games against Bradford, it's a bummer and it happens, but I feel like it's difficult to say they're the worst results. When you're at your lowest ebb as a football club and you're losing to third bottom in the Football League and it not even looking like a surprise, I think that's why, to me, it felt like the worst result, certainly, that I'd seen in my life.
Maybe Nigel Clough will turn them around and they'll get promoted into League One this season, and we'll look back and go, well, actually, it's not that bad a result.
Maybe. And then next season, when we're playing them, they'll come up the same and win a game.
The other thing I was going to say was there's a difference between being the worst result, because it's not the worst result, I don't think, maybe on paper. I remember that result under Quinney against Bury, 2 divisions ahead, they were rock bottom. So in terms of purely distance between the two sides and league positions, I think there've been worse results.
Correct.
But I remember being devastated by umpteen games in Sunderland's past, since I started following Sunderland. And this doesn't feel like the end of the world. It's just...
No, it doesn't, but I think there's a difference between the worst result and the result that upsets you the most. Because if we're saying by the definition of your worst result being the one you're most upset by, then it would be like losing against Man City in the League Cup final. That obviously isn't Sunderland's worst result. That's the game that hurts the most. Like, that was the game where I was most devastated leaving, because at half-time it looked like we were going to win.
Just to kind of sum up, and I think it echoes to what you're alluding to, is that it's almost like this is the most embarrassing, for me, the most embarrassing set of circumstances and the most embarrassing result. So I've got a couple of friends who aren't Sunderland fans, they support Premier League teams, and they saw the result, and I had messages off both of them individually basically saying, what the fuck has happened to Sunderland? What on earth's going on? And that's the first time they said something like that to me. So I think, for people who've got no vested interest in the club to see that result and then ask me as a Sunderland fan what the fuck's going on, I think that speaks volumes for it.
Okay, well, I'm glad that was a good discussion. I feel like we've all took something.
They're counselling for you.
Yeah, a little bit. But I did say it was going to be a therapy session, and it's also all opinions. You can have different opinions, and that's fine. I think Twitter needs to learn that at times. Everyone's entitled to their own opinion. But let's talk about the game itself. I don't want to go too heavy on it, because obviously we had the ratings podcast. Sunderland hit the woodwork twice in the first 10 minutes. Well, Danny Graham hit it twice. One of them a good header, one of them a one that he should put in. He's pretty much stand on the line. He somehow hits the bar. But if one of them goes in, I think it's fair to say Sunderland do probably win, and we're not having this conversation right now. Is that fair? Do you think that if we do score in the first 10 minutes, Sunderland wins the match, Chris?
Pattern of the season generally in most games. I mean, pretty much all of our League One games have almost been on the basis of first goal wins, basically. First goal, the winner. When we score, we shut up shop, we slow the game down, and actually other teams have tried to do that as well, although we haven't been, our defence have been so good, or their attack's been so poor that we haven't necessarily been on the end of conceding a goal too many times, and when we have, we've managed to come back. But yeah, so if we had, Mansfield wouldn't have scored. Mansfield were kind of doing what we did. I mean, they didn't look out of place. They looked like, another League One side coming to the Stadium of Light. They didn't look horrific. We kind of tried to control the game as we normally do. We got a bit erratic. They actually put us under more pressure on the ball than most, like I say, League One sides have this season, actually. Whether they'd kind of looked at what Portsmouth did to us and thought, well, we'll give that a go, I don't know. But yeah, if we'd scored, we would have won. I don't think Mansfield would have gotten that goal. They were trying to stay in the game and hope for a chance to win the game, which is actually what Sunderland have been doing a lot this season.
And in terms of the team selection, we're going to talk about a lot of the negatives after this, but was there any players, Bomber, that you thought, came out of that looking, smelling the roses and looking good?
But if we're defining it as one of the worst results in Sunderland's history, then I think it would be very hypocritical to say that, yeah, this person's done very well, this person's done very well. I did think, considering it was on debut, McFadzean did enough to at least give Parkinson something to think about for the next game. Other than that, no, not really for me. Danny Graham, I will say that I might be lambasted for this, but I actually would sympathise a little bit with Graham for that second miss that he hit the bar with. I know it's from a yard out, and when people miss from that sort of distance, we say it's the worst misses of all time, and they get played over Christmas on Sky Sports for eternity. But I think he's anticipating, and certainly me, having watched it a few times, thought that the defender was actually getting to there, and I'm not convinced that the defender hasn't flicked it onto his head, and he's kind of almost reacted to it as if it's been hit in his face. I'm not sure.
No, I think what happened was, and I might have to look at it again, but my first instinct in looking at the replay was it just slightly clipped off the bar on the way down, and it slightly changed the trajectory of the ball. And I think Graham thought he knew where it was going to be, and it slightly kind of came further back because it clipped off the bar, and it actually hit off more the back of his head than the front of his head to go forward.
Yeah,
but
so I think in real
time,
to
see it again.
Yeah, in real time, it looks like an absolute horrific miss. But I've watched the highlights again this morning. I've kind of rewound that chance 4 or 5 times to look at, has he actually missed a sitter, or can we forgive him for a couple of things? And it looks like the direction of the ball did change, and I thought it was off the head of the defender, but it may well have been just clipped the side of the bar. But so yeah, I won't. He did all right, to be fair. You know, that chance that he hit the post with early on was okay. It just smacks of a striker who's not sharp enough because he's not played enough, not had enough minutes. But I don't think he disgraced himself at all.
It's a shame we don't have other camera angles so we can really assess the miss. Chris, have you got something to add on there? Is there any players that you thought, came out with at least a modicum of respect?
Well, yeah, I mean, let's talk about the strikers first quickly. Will Grigg and Danny Graham, to be fair to them, there was Phil Parkinson's words after the game where he said there were a lot of crosses and he thought we'd done well in that area. But I thought it was just aimless. Let's hope for the best. And half of them went too long, half of them went too short, half of them went in areas where there weren't any Sunderland players. So they didn't get a huge amount of service. And the other issue was, a lot's been said about, Dan Neil playing the right passes in. And I'm not necessarily saying Dan Neil was the answer, but, Will Grigg needs a certain type of service. And he had Max Power and Dobson standing behind him who couldn't pass to another player in red and white, never mind slide Will Grigg in behind the back four. They were awful. I said in the preview before the game, I was hoping they were going to come in and find some form and get a rhythm going because they need it. I don't know what's wrong with them. I don't know what, in this system, I don't know what they are. Because they're not box to box, they're not holding midfielders, they're not attacking midfielders. They're just nothing. I don't know what they're supposed to do. I don't know if they know what they're supposed to be doing. And I've seen both players have good games. Both players haven't turned to kind of poor players overnight. I'm just wondering if they're being restricted in this system where they can't play their normal game or do what they're good at. Because something's wrong with those two. I don't know whether it's just them and they're out of form and there's something not quite right, or, like I said, whether the system just doesn't suit them. Bomber mentioned McFadden. That could be interesting because he had such a good game that he might possibly be an option to play in the left centre-back role, possibly in home games. I think that might be useful because if we've got Hume on the left, McFadden could get on and maybe overlap Hume and actually be an attacking option down that left-hand side, with the way Sheffield United play, which is, I think, the way Parkinson wants to go with his centre-halves. Same with Sanderson on the right. I thought, although Sanderson was maybe at fault for the goal, I think he's young, lack of concentration, he needs games. But it was interesting down the right-hand side with him and Diamond. I thought he was always an option, especially on the outside of Diamond. And he looks fit, he looks quick. And I think, in home games, if he gets a few games under his belt and we keep with this system, he could be an option going down that right-hand side from the right centre-back position.
And just to go back a little bit on McFadden, I actually thought McFadden was probably our best player yesterday, best of a bad bunch. But did anyone see his post-match interview where his first line was, well, it's just the FA Cup? And I thought that was a bit of a, you would think that the person who was interviewing would maybe go, yeah, maybe we'll restart that. What do you make of that, Bomber? Do you think that was just basically him making a little mistake and he meant, it's not a league game? It's not. Do you know what, Connor? That's kind of how I read it.
I think he's probably been fed that line. He's been put up to the cameras for his first kind of post-match interview and a 1-0 defeat for Mansfield. It wouldn't surprise me if they've gone into the changing room, the dressing room, after that game, and the first thing Phil Parkinson said to him is like, it's all right, lads, it's only the FA Cup, we're concentrating on the league, etc. And he's just regurgitated that. That's something I could see happening. Chris, shaking your head, do you not think so?
No, I'd be absolutely amazed if Phil Parkinson went in that dressing room and said, don't worry about it, lads, it doesn't matter.
No,
I'd be amazed.
I don't think he genuinely has gone into that game going, well, it's only the FA Cup, who cares? Maybe it's a little bit of saving face. If it was me, I wouldn't have put him up to do his first post-match interview for the club, having a 1-0 defeat in the FA Cup to a team that's near the bottom of the whole entire football league. But yeah, I wouldn't read too much into that myself. Well, certainly not as a personal slight on him.
Well, you've been there, Connor. What would you have done?
What I've done, or if I was doing that interview,
if you were doing that, yeah.
It's just the FA Cup. I would probably have spoken to someone after we did it and said, maybe we should cut out the first question. That's probably literally how I would have approached that because, it's possible. I'm certainly not blaming the lads who did the interviews or anything because, it's a hard environment. They've got 1,000,001 things to do and, they have to trust that players won't say stupid things sometimes. It's right at the start of the interview and it can be interpreted in different ways. But to me, when I saw it and I was like, his first line as well, it's just the FA Cup. I'm like, is that the attitude? Is that the attitude that goes on? Did we approach this game all week going, it's just the FA Cup? And even if he said it and that's never been said to him, that's clearly the attitude that's been presented to him that, this is just an FA Cup game, lads, a chance to get match fitness, all that sort of stuff. And I'm like, well, if that is the attitude, we're here to win football matches. I know it's the FA Cup and people are like, we're not going to win it, but aren't we here to get paid to win football matches? Is that not what the whole point of being a footballer is?
Yeah, well, the other thing is, obviously, I mean, Connor, I mean, you can probably talk about this more than I can, but I'd expect, especially off the club website and from the club media team, I mean, I mean, you're almost trying to put out your message. You're trying to, I mean, you've got an opportunity to put out a message in the way you want your message to go out. I mean, that's the point of the club media, you know, that you're getting out there the impression that Phil Parkinson wants to build around the club, and you know they're part of the communications to the fans, and they've got an element of, right, what is the message to go out? And if that went through a bunch of people before it went out, and people just went, yeah, it's fine, then either there's not a good system to say, let's really scream up, you know, we need to make sure our messages are on point and the fans get the message that this is a bad result and we're going to be back on it next week. Or, yes, that's the message we want, and let's just say it doesn't matter and move on. So
both scenarios are pretty bad, though, aren't they?
Yeah, exactly. I just don't know. I mean, you, like I say, Connor, you know better whether anybody actually does look at it and screen it and actually say that's not the message we want to go out, or whether these people just do the interview and just press a button and it goes straight out onto the website.
No, I wouldn't, obviously, you know, I know a lot of the ones who work there. I certainly wouldn't want to dig them out. They're all good. But I mean, the club's made changes, you know, to their media department. You know, historically, Kate would have been there watching, or Louise Wanless would have been there watching and knowing what was said and whether or not it was, you know, good or not. And, you know, they've made cuts to that department. They don't have PR people there anymore. So ultimately, when you do that, you're likely to have, you know, potential PR gaffes. I feel sorry for McFadzean though, because that's tarnished the one player who probably came out looking good, and now fans have probably got a negative view of him. I've certainly seen his video that went out on Twitter, because the club's now putting the full interviews on Twitter. It's got over 50 odd comments. I suggest that most of them are probably negative, because
especially with the negative comments he got when he first joined the club. Like, people were looking into his history and saying, and basically slating him as a person before he'd even put a red and white shirt on. So yeah, it is a shame.
Yeah. Right. We'll talk now though. Power and Dobson. Now, Chris, you've touched on Power and Dobson, but you can't tell me, Bomber, that looking at that midfield two, Power and Dobson, that either of them are good enough to be Sunderland central midfield players right now.
Based on the last 6 weeks
this
or
season,
so.
Basically this season. Dobson got sent off on game one as well, remember?
Yeah. So I think actually that in pre-season and early first, taking that sending off aside, we had Dobson playing quite clearly a more deeper role, and Max Power playing more further forward, and that actually worked quite well. And that has very quickly just disappeared into the ether. But since then, I think since probably the second game of the season, neither of them have done anything of note. I don't know whether the captaincy is weighing heavy on Max Power, perhaps. Who knows? But just the performances just aren't there. And we've seen the resurgence of Grant Leadbitter go from essentially, you know, the fans going, why on earth is Grant Leadbitter here? Like, his legs are gone, he should retire. To him, you know, for me, being the first name on the team sheet when we're talking about the midfield, and that shouldn't be the case. Dobson was brought in because he was a bright young prospect and he could do this, that, and the other. And we saw little bits of it at the start of when he first arrived, but he's certainly not kicked on. In fact, I'd argue he's regressed. Max Power, we see flashes from him again last season, and at the start of this season we saw flashes from him, but that's very quickly just disappeared and been forgotten about. And I can only go back to what Chris was saying earlier. I don't know what they do, and I'm not 100% convinced that they know what they do now, because you've got three midfielders in there. When you've got Leadbitter in there as well, let's say you have a midfield three of Leadbitter, Power and Dobson, you've got three players who certainly on the face of it like to play in the exact same way. And when you've got three in midfield, you need essentially three very clear defined jobs that are all different for one another, so you can all offer something in that midfield battle. And they're all trying to do the same thing. They're all trying to pick the balls up off the centre halves. They're all trying to spray, you know, diagonal balls or through balls or long balls that are 20, 30 yards in length. And you just can't have that, and it just doesn't work. Sometimes you can get away with it if you put in a good individual performance in terms of your harrying, your tackling, your ball winning, your ball retention. But none of them are doing that either, or neither of them, sorry, I should say, are doing that either. The problem is that Parkinson's kind of made a rod for his own back in making Power captain, because he's shown in history that once he's named someone captain, the chances are that he will stick with them. And I don't know if Power has got comfortable because he knows that. And that's maybe why we're seeing a change in his performance and a drop in performance. I'm not sure, but I can't put my finger on it. But to answer your question, neither of them are doing anything to suggest they're even League One players at the minute.
And I think, sorry, I'll go to you in a second, Chris, but I just wanted to make an added point on Power. He's out of contract at the end of the season. Is that playing a factor for him? He's in his, mid 26, is he? 26, 27? He's possibly looking at his last big sort of contract, and it must be weighing on his head that his performances haven't been very good. And at the moment, you would be surprised if Sunderland retained him. But Chris, fire off what Bomber said there.
Well, I mean, just on the point that he was captain, I mean, he kind of did to begin with. I mean, make a rod for his own back, and I think Max Power would have been hooked quicker than he was, because the last couple of league games he's been on the bench, and that was purely because of his bad form. But I mean, I said it earlier on, and I mean, the more I think about it, the more I'm convinced that these two players are being asked to do a role that they're not comfortable with, because I just don't think they're as bad as they're playing. I think we've seen both of them have better games. We've seen both of them have better runs of form. I remember Dobson playing against us before he joined us, and he looked a good player. And I thought, yeah, good young player when we signed him. I thought that might be a decent deal, but I just don't think Parkinson's playing them in their positions in a system where it plays to their strengths. And I mean, I'd be quite happy. Anybody could argue, that. They should be good enough to, adapt to their new positions and what they've been asked to do. And I wouldn't disagree with that at all. But I just don't think we're playing to their strengths.
We've got lots of young players at Sunderland, and we know the under-23s have been shocking everyone with their performances this season. I think it was 4 wins after, I said it on last week's podcast, but in the 18 months I was there, the Sunderland under-23s did not win a league game. And so for me to see now that they are winning games is interesting. But we've got a lot of good young players. Obviously Dan Neil's a big one we normally talk about. Jack Diamond's a big one we talk about. Embleton is more of a squad player, but he generally fits in that category. But we have got a few good young players at the minute coming through. Is a good chance against Fleetwood to sort of bed them in, but should Phil Parkinson maybe be thinking a bit bigger than that? We're seeing a Sunderland team that's void of creativity, and I don't think Phil Parkinson could really argue against that. I think if he was here right now, I don't think he would disagree that we are void of creativity. We've got a out of form Chris Maguire, who just looks like a shell of the player that started the season. We've got a real just lack of quality in the final third. Is it time, do you think, Bomber, to give these young players a bigger chance? Because we've seen them impressing every time they've played this season. We've never really been let down. I think Jack Diamond was probably another player who didn't really let us down. His final ball was poor, but other than that, he was beating his men. He was good defensively. Do you think it's time that Parkinson really considers these young players?
I think he has to. He's got an opportunity now in the next game to do so. I said in the preview pod that it was a chance. It was a free hit for him, really, to go out and put 4 or 5 of these good young players who are getting good results and probably deserve a chance. And we've been screaming for pretty much all season. It was a good opportunity to throw them in there. And yeah, if we ended up losing 1-0 in those circumstances, I'd be a lot more accepting of it. And I'd be like, right, okay, well, it was a free hit. Those young players have got a bit of experience, but at the moment you can see that they've not, they're not ready to challenge for first team places. He didn't do that. He's got one more opportunity to do that. And for me, he has to take it. He has to take it because, was it Graham Souness who famously said that you don't win anything with kids with regards to Alex Ferguson? Or was it Alan Hansen? Sorry. Yeah. But I'm not suggesting that we're going to be United's class of 92, but hungry, good, talented young players should be thrown in there. They should be thrown in there and given the opportunity to shine, because they're less likely to be fazed by the pressures. There's no crowd in there in the stadiums at the minute as well. Not that Sunderland fans would necessarily get on the backs of the young kids. I think one thing that we are very good at as a fan base is backing our youngsters and encouraging them on. But for me, he's got no other option now. They need to be given the opportunity to impress and need to be given the chance to give him something to think about when selecting for league games, because the selections that he's making at the minute just aren't cutting the grade, quite clearly.
Chris?
No, I'm not with Bomber on this one. And I kind of said this, I think, 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I always kind of smile after England get knocked out of tournaments normally. It's usually, especially I remember Sven-Goran Eriksson's reign and stuff like that, where we got knocked out in quarterfinals, and everyone after was like, oh, it's because we've got these players in who've been there for 4 years. Oh my God, why aren't these 21-year-olds in? Get them all in and all this sort of stuff. And you have to kind of laugh at that sometimes, because, I think, you look through all those young players and they're all, decent prospects, and Dan Neil looks like a decent prospect, and Jack Diamond looks like a decent prospect. But I mean, just to kind of throw them all into the team, I mean, it's we're talking about the end of the world at the club, and we've got some good players in the squad. It's just purely the tactics that we're going out every week are restricting the players we've got. So I don't think it's not the personnel. It's not kind of, we've got players who've got good records in League One, who scored lots of goals and fired teams to promotion and won titles in League One. All these players are decent players. They haven't turned into bad players overnight. They've been asked to play a certain way, and that way means that we don't go out and steamroll the teams. We don't finish teams off. We stay in the game. We defend. We make sure we don't concede. And at some point, we'll get a chance, and we need to put that chance away. And that's the tactics. And it's restricting the players. Like, we've talked about Will Craig, we've talked about Danny Graham, we've talked about the midfield. They're not asked to express themselves. They're not asked to, say, get in the final third and, commit players. You see, sometimes we'll play a ball into the box, and I'd say 90% of the time we have one player in the box. I'd be amazed if there was ever an occasion where we went on the attack and got it wide and had 3, 4, 5 players charging into the box. It never happens. You never see us on the counter attack. Suddenly get the ball, in our own half, and you never see 3 or 4 players charging into the opposition half, because they're told not to do that. They're told to keep the ball. The opposition get back into their shape, and we've got to try and get forward with kind of slow, methodical football. And so I just think, yes, give them game time. I think that Dan Neil give them minutes off the bench, but again, with the games we're involved in and the tactics we play, the last 20 minutes is usually tight. And are you going to risk them putting Dan Neil on, who is more of an attacking player, and you might say, go and express yourself. He loses the ball, we concede a goal, we drop 3 points, we drop a point or whatever, and Phil Parkinson might never trust him again. We need to, if we start finishing teams off, then these players can get more minutes and we can really progress them on. And in the cup as well, get them out there, but then don't whinge if we get beat. So I don't think it's the personnel. I think it's the tactics.
Chris, I just wanted to kind of clarify there, because I don't disagree with what you were saying. So I think I was looking a lot more short term. I'm looking kind of next game, Fleetwood game, throw them in because there's nothing to lose, and I'm not advocating throwing 4 or 5 youngsters into the starting 11 for the game against MK Dons, for example.
Right. Well, just quickly on that, the Fleetwood one, I think the rules make it that you can't actually throw as many in as you might like them to, because we've got to play so many that played in the last league game, and so many that have played, half of their league appearances and all this sort of stuff. There's quite a lot of rules around the AFL trophy that he's got to.
I just wanted to clarify that I wasn't kind of saying, right, for the next league game we need to throw in 5 youngsters because they're not doing it. It was just, I just want to see him get more of a chance to impress and to break through into a starting 11.
But it's amazing after league games, even Ipswich when we got beat, you see so many messages on social media saying, why is it Dan Neil in the starting 11? Get Jack Diamond, out, wide and all this sort of stuff. They're good players, but that's not going to, in this system, all you're going to be doing is swapping Dan Neil for someone who's restricted in this system, and he's going to be as restricted and can't express himself. You put Jack Diamond out wide, and he's an attacking player. He started off a striker up top. You stick him out wide as a right wing back, and you're expecting him to tackle, in the next to the corner flag as well, and that's not his game. So, all you're doing is doing like for like, because these players have got a certain job. So, yes, they might, on the off chance do it slightly better, but I don't think that would make huge changes, because the system we play means we play like this.
So basically, what you're saying is while Phil Parkinson is manager, it doesn't matter who's playing, we're always going to be devoid of creativity, because that's essentially how we play.
Yeah, he's worked on it.
And I heard what you said there, and I don't necessarily disagree with what you're saying, but what's the point in playing these players in under 23 games and then playing really well, and for you just to be like, well, for the manager, not you personally, for the manager to just be like, yeah, they did okay, but I'm not going to throw them in. I'd rather stick with what I've trusted to provide mundane and stifling football. It just seems bizarre to me. And I think that's why fans get frustrated when you play a game and you draw 0-0, or you, even if you win 1-0, and it's hard to watch. And we've got all these good young players that were like, well, they would make a positive difference.
The club knew what we were getting. You look at his track record, getting promotion by playing experienced players at the clubs he's been at. He's never brought through, a conveyor belt of youth players. He's never relied on youth. He's never brought the fantastic players through. He's never chucked a load of young players into a squad and getting them promoted. He's always, in the past, he's always relied on experience. So the club knew this. And like you say, we've got this fantastic academy, and the club basically said, look, ignore that because we're getting you in on your track record. So do what you do, and we don't care if you use the academy. And what's the point in having this fantastic academy, Category 1 academy, brilliant, one of the best in the country, and then bring him the manager who's got a track record of ignoring young players?
Yeah, I can't believe I'm going to do this, but to quote something Niall said, I know. I think he was actually onto something when he's talking about Parkinson and young players. Obviously, he had that experience with Bolton where he could only use young players and was getting absolutely pummeled every week. You could argue that might have scarred him a little bit in terms of his fear to use younger players. I mean, it would be pretty weak of him if that was the case. But
it makes him a very bad manager. If he goes,
it does.
I have to play a bunch of underqualified 18-year-olds because we have no money. Therefore, from now on, I will never ever play.
Yeah, but it probably has put a bit of fear into him to do that, particularly as, again, as Niall has said, and I know a few of us have said that this is the biggest job that he's ever going to get. He doesn't want to blow it. So
I said that a couple of times in the past.
Yeah.
This is Phil Parkinson's big one. This is his big chance.
Well, it's bollocks though, isn't it? Like, we're all sat here trying. I mean, I know you aren't necessarily, you're not defending Phil Parkinson, but it's bollocks that that's the way we think. It's a manager who thinks, I am scared to play younger players because, I'm worried about my job going forward. Well, no, do your job. If these players are better and they fit and they can fit in a system that'll actually create chances, then change it up. But another point I wanted to make was he's loaned in Dion Sanderson from Wolves under 23s and playing him. We literally just beat Wolves under 23s on Friday. So that's a sort of point that when I was watching that result come through, I was like, well, that's interesting.
It's because they didn't have Sanderson.
It must have been, yeah. Defensive errors. I mean, we've touched on this, how does Phil Parkinson bounce back from this? So I'm not going to go into that in depth, but we will talk, Fleetwood on kind of hinted at what we'd like to see in the team. But obviously, we know that I think they're restricted probably to playing roughly 5 players that have played regularly so far for Sunderland. So which of them younger players, would be definites in that starting 11, Chris? Which ones do you want to see given a chance to impress?
Well, I think Dan Neil he was on the bench and he played in the last EFL game, I think. If not, he played in the one before that, so he has been playing. I think he needs, to be honest, I've said it a couple of times, again, repeat myself, but Dan Neil, I think, needs one more loan move before he's ready. I think he looks very comfortable on the ball, but he looked knackered. I think it was Carlisle. He looked knackered with about 20 minutes left and he got pulled off. And I think whereas Jack Diamond, I think they're both on a par in terms of, I think, how good they are. But I just think Jack Diamond, after last season at Harrogate, is that one step ahead because he had that season of first team football against, proper fellas in the conference when Harrogate got promoted, and he's been part of that Saturday, Tuesday routine, which is probably difficult when you step up to the first team and play that intensity every 3 or 4 days. So I'd like to see Dan Neil in there. Like I said, I'd like to see him get more minutes, but I think he needs a loan move. I think Jack Diamond's going to be in there again. But on the flip side, I'd like to see those two in. I don't think Kim Bjork is going to be fit. Maybe one of the defenders, because I think we at times look short and we've had suspensions. We've already had injuries at the back. So whether it's Younger, whether it's Taylor, maybe one of those two, just to get those two kind of accustomed to first team football. But on the flip side, it's a chance to try and get some of these more established players some form as well. And we've been saying it all season, but we're waiting for it. I'm just hoping with one of these games, Power and Dobson, Will Gregg, Daddy Graham, they're just going to find some form at some time, at some point.
Do you not think as well it's like throwing in a full team of young players is all well and good, but you actually need them to play with the senior players so you know whether or not they fit in, and I think that makes sense. But if we've got an international week coming up, but Sunderland look like they're going to play through it, which I can't remember if we've actually done this in League One. It feels like we've always played. We've always not played on international weeks, but only Conor McLaughlin and Tom Flanagan are going to be missing. Bomber, do you think that's going to be an issue? Or certainly with the way the defence looks at the minute, where Willis isn't necessarily 100% fit and McLaughlin's essentially been covering, and Luke O'Nien, I think there's question marks over his fitness as well. Looks like we're looking short at the back.
Yeah,
it's fair to say.
Yeah. So I think if we'd had more cover in those centre back positions, then it wouldn't bother me. It was actually more of an annoyance that when we used to cancel games, because all it did was just create a backlog for us, which we never seemed to be able to pull out of. So it's been our story of League One that we've cancelled games due to international breaks and then fallen behind and then thought, oh, it's all right, we've got 2 games in hand or 3 games in hand because of the international breaks, and we never make the most of it. So it was always an annoyance for me. So on one hand, I'm quite glad that we're actually playing it. On the other hand, the circumstances dictate that actually we probably could do with it not being played. Say if Willis isn't necessarily quite fit, I don't really ever want to see Luke O'Nien in the back 3 again. I love the bloke. I think he's great for the club, but he's most certainly not a centre back. So yeah, we are light in cover, and if we're going to lose another 2 in McLaughlin and Flanagan, it does leave us exceptionally short. And the game, is it the MK Dons game?
Yeah.
Which is a potential banana skin for us. So yeah, I think on one hand I'm happy we're playing it, but on the other hand, the international break couldn't have come at a worse time if we have to play.
Yeah, I mean we've missed one already, so we're already kind of looking at the table saying we are where we are, but we've got a game in hand, which is always annoying, because especially with the question mark over Parkinson, because a lot of people are saying, well, if we win our game in hand, we're up with the top 2. But yeah, if we don't, then we're clinging onto a playoff place. So I mean that one game is huge. If you make that 2, if you make that 3. I mean, where are we in the league? Are we kind of 2nd or 3rd, or are we 7th or 6th or 7th? So
well, that's the thing. Fans tend to count those games in hand as guaranteed 3 points.
They do, don't they?
Like whenever, like you could be 10 points behind with 3 games in hand, and in fans' heads, you're a point behind.
Yeah. I think Jack Ross did as well.
He did.
Because I think he told the players we're promoted. We've got 2 games in hand.
It was 3 at one point, wasn't it? We had like 3 games in hand, and we just pretty much kept drawing 1-1. Like, oh yeah, there's another 1-1, Jack. Another 1-1. Another 1-1.
Yeah, Jack Ross kept collecting them like get out of jail free cards, and it never turned out like that. But yeah, it's with one already piling up and having to reschedule. The other consideration, and part of us doesn't want to think about it, but it is to start thinking about points per game.
Don't do it to us, Chris.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's always a potential scenario. So I mean, I think I would hope that somebody at the club was savvy enough to kind of say, this is something we need to kind of keep an eye on, because if the worst happens, it's the worst case scenario. But I just hope somebody's got an eye on that. And I think because last season it kind of tripped us up a little bit.
I think if points per game was brought in now, we'd probably get promoted. I would guess, maybe.
No,
because if we win, we'd go second, wouldn't we? So we'll probably know our best stuff. Man, I don't want to talk about it. I'm sick of COVID anyway. Okay, well, unless anyone has any other hot takes to throw in, we'll probably
bring back Aidan McGeady.
I was trying my best not to bring Aidan McGeady up, and now you've done it. I'm not gonna jump into a rant, but I do feel that when you're devoid of all creativity and your most creative player, and Chris Maguire is like playing as bad as he is right now, having Aidan McGeady as an option wouldn't be the end of the world. But hey, that is just my take on the matter. So thanks for listening to our Roker Report podcast today. Please subscribe, like it, comment on it, tweet us, tell everyone that Chris is wrong or Bomber's wrong, or agree with me. It's all good.